So I have a couple of prepared questions to help set the baseline for the discussions that we'll have over the next few days. And if we have time, we'll take a few questions from the audience. We'll be really each of the organizations represented in this and why are they even involved in AI or AI for good? We'll start with Abra.
Sure, Sasan. So for now, USAID has really been in a kind of learn and explore phase as far as AI is concerned. So we don't have any specific AI for X type sector but what we do is we, through some of our innovation mechanisms, we try and identify where AI can help be impactful in our achieving development outcomes. And so we have some programming through our grand challenges. We have some programming through our development innovation ventures awards, where AI has shown that it can help us get to better predictions of, early warning systems where we can identify that earthquakes are happening faster when we use machine learning enhanced methods, or where we can do better prediction of disease surveillance using machine learning specific epidemiological kind of approaches. So we're not really in a place where we're doubling down on any specific sector, but what we're doing is really exploring and identifying where it can help us make better gains in the development work that we're doing. The other thing that I want to mention is that while we're in this learning and exploring stage, we really are keen to understand the harms that can also be manifested in these types of systems. And so we're doing a lot of work trying to understand the specific types of harms and how we can prevent them. And so things around ethics and bias and fairness, which we'll get into in a lot more greater detail later this afternoon and tomorrow, but where we've spent a lot of time trying to really understand and offer guidance for how to mitigate those types of issues.
Thank you. Bridget?
Great. So at Google, we've been working at the intersection of AI and social impact for some time, both in our own research and engineering efforts and then in work that we've supported at google.org, but it's been a little bit more opportunistic. And so just last week, we brought together some of that work and recommitted to doing more and providing more resources in a new program called AI for Social Good. It's a combination and a partnership between our Google AI team, which is the collection of research teams at Google that are thinking about AI research and trying to drive breakthroughs that can hopefully benefit everyone, and work that we're doing at google.org. And the goal really is to try to jumpstart more work in this space. So we've specifically at google.org have announced a Google AI Impact Challenge, which is currently open. Applications are currently open. And the hope there is that we'll both be able to fund projects. So we're providing $25 million in total funding, as well as access to Google AI expertise, credit and consulting from Google Cloud, partnership with our Launchpad Accelerator, which provides mentorship for ML-based startups around the world, to try and essentially bring together the suite of resources that we have at Google that allow some of our AI work to be successful and bringing that to bear for some of these projects. It's not going to be something that, we all sort of transform overnight, right? This is not we're still in a very nascent stage of this work, and this isn't going to be some sort of silver bullet solution to all the world's problems, and I think we're very aware of that. So we're also very committed to sort of partnering on this in the long run. The hope is that with this funding and injection of resource from our teams, we'll also be able to learn with the sector, with each other, about the areas where we could do more if we had some of the other barriers removed. And so we're sort of thinking about what does this look like, both in the short term to inspire and support some of those hero cases, as well as thinking about the long-term ecosystem changes that might be necessary to do more of this work.
And at Catholic Relief Services, I'd say we're also in that learning phase. We have a few different examples where we've applied machine learning in a meaningful way to predict things like household vulnerability, also in our fundraising space. But we're still being careful to kind of navigate to make sure that the ethical considerations are being looked out for, and that we're really keeping an eye on the fact that the technology does not become self-justifying, that it's really focused on the results and how that can impact our work. One of the things we've done recently to help in this regard is we formed a task force to bring together folks who are interested from our monitoring and evaluation areas, along with our IT areas, to figure out what the guidance is that's going to be appropriate for our staff and how we can help build awareness about resources that exist, and perhaps most importantly, the use cases to say, how can this technology work in our programs and ultimately have some sort of impact?
At IBM, there are many different branches, but one of the main programs I'm talking about is the IBM Science for Good, which was launched 3 years ago. And the idea is to apply AI to solve societal problems. The way we do it is by bringing together IBM researchers and engineers together with academic fellows and subject matter experts from nonprofit organizations, and bring them together and helping them solve problems which are brought forth by the nonprofit organizations. So in 3 years, in discussions with over 200 plus NGOs, we've launched 25 different initiatives where around 120 IBM researchers and engineers have devoted their time and expertise, along with academic fellows supported by fellowships, and as I said, subject matter experts from nonprofits. We've tackled problems very diverse, such as identifying Zika virus reservoirs in the Americas, to developing a recommendation engine for suggesting what philanthropic models work, to understanding the relationships between hate speech, online hate speech, and offline phenomena, and so on.
I'm really actually quite fortunate because Justin Spellhog got up here yesterday and went into great detail about the investment that we're making in the AI for Good space. But to summarize that, we are working in the areas of AI for Earth, dealing with climate change and food security, AI for accessibility, helping folks with disabilities do more and have advantages that the rest of us take for granted. And then most recently, in the last few weeks, have launched our AI for Humanities program. We've already committed 1.6 billion in resources to this program, worked with 114,000 different nonprofits, and are committed to really doubling those numbers in the next couple of years. Specifically, that's the more general case. More specifically, I would say, in regards to AI, is we're trying to focus our efforts on creating reusable templates. We know that there are many types of solutions that are going to cut across the entire nonprofit sector. Those types of solutions that can work for many, most, or even all nonprofits. And so really kind of focusing in on generating those templates, making them available out on GitHub, open source, and allowing the community in general to adopt those things. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we're doing.
Thank you. So this is just a brief overview of what each of the organizations are doing in the space. And based on your experience, one of the questions that we've received in the lead up to the summit in preparation for this session is really wanting to understand, why is AI significant for our sector, and what can it do today? How do we differentiate between Hollywood and the hype, and also what is possible really to be incorporated in our programs in the field? So Aubrey, let's start with you again.
Sure, and I'll probably provide a slightly different lens, because I think there's some really great expertise up here that can give a little bit more nuance in a couple of other areas. But one of the things that I find so compelling about machine learning, and I do have several doubts, so I should caveat all of this with there's also a downside, but one of the things that I really appreciate is that machine learning can in some ways drive inclusion. And so that's something that we care very deeply about, and I'm sure most people in this room also care deeply about. But what I mean by that is that machine learning can kind of open the aperture of what we consider to be a valid proxy for things like financial inclusion or getting a job. And so as an example, there are a couple of really interesting credit startups. And so companies that have used machine learning to create new portfolios for people who have been traditionally unbanked, for example. And so you don't have a formal payment history, you don't have a formal banking history, and therefore you're limited in the access that you have to formal financial institutions. So these Tala and Lindo are a couple of examples that we've learned about in our research, where they've used machine learning to identify the characteristics of individuals that might indicate creditworthiness, even outside of the scope of the traditional proxies that we're used to relying on. And through that sort of innovative approach to assigning creditworthiness, you're equalizing things. You're bringing more people into the formal financial front. And so I think that's a really interesting application where it has direct relevance to the work that we do in trying to bring more people into the formal economy and bring more people into, more sustainable livelihoods. And so for things like that, I think there's a really unique value add that machine learning can offer. There are also concerns about how you're able to reach specific people with this new form of creation of new proxies. Certain people have a digital footprint and certain people do not. And if you're using that digital footprint to create a creditworthiness score, you're also now excluding those who don't have that digital footprint. So I think there's always going to be these kinds of issues that arise with new forms of innovation, but I think it's still something that really merits interest and exploration.
Bridget?
Yeah, I think, so obviously we're seeing AI transform so much of the world around us. It's inherent in so many of the products that we use. It's inherent in the way that the companies are starting to think about doing business. And so, we've been thinking about this work. The driving force for us is really making sure that the social sector and the work of organizations who are really serving disadvantaged and more vulnerable communities is at the table to participate. And I think that for me is a driving imperative. Yes, there are risks and those are worth talking about, and we talk a lot about them at Google. We've issued AI principles. We're sort of trying to engage in that conversation in as many ways as possible, and both internally for ourselves and also for the broader community. But not participating potentially has a really big downside risk. This work is growing exponentially right now. If you look at the number of machine learning papers, it truly, we're on the hockey stick. It's growing at a rate faster than Moore's Law at the moment, which is the rate that we often talk about driving the last big transformation in technology and computing. And so as we think about the potential here, for us, I think there is this imperative to participate. And I do think we need to get a little bit, and you mentioned the Hollywood, like getting beyond the hype, I think is the other big thing. And really starting to think about what are these very specific applications. So stopping to talk about AI, actually, and starting to talk about the real specific capabilities that AI has. Aubrey was mentioning some of them, but what does it look like to take on a problem that looks like an image classification problem or an object detection problem, something that is much more specific than the broad AI for good that we often talk about. And I think that is one of our hopes of the challenge, is that we'll get to some projects that have some of those specific applications and then can push those forward.
Thank you.
Let me share a specific example. In Malawi, so Malawi is a landlocked country, about 84% of the population relies on subsistence agriculture. And that population is extremely vulnerable to weather-related shocks, whether that's severe floods that occurred back in 2015 or cyclical droughts. What we were seeing was the information that was available in terms of predicting food security was very broad. So there's many of you may have heard of a tool called FuseNet, which is a famine early warning system, operates at a large geography. We really wanted to pinpoint more at a household level which families were more resilient and more susceptible to these shocks. So we partnered with a university to create a high-frequency, low-burden data collection protocol, and we relied on community members to talk with their neighbors and gather data points on a monthly basis that gave us enough of a data set that we could then build a machine learning algorithm around to predict which households not were experiencing food insecurity, but we could look 1 or 2 months in advance and say, which are the ones that are at greatest risk? This information could then be shared back to the local village development committees who can target the resources and the response. We're currently taking this model and trying to adapt it to Madagascar. But one of the challenges that we're facing is it's very contextual. So the predictors that exist in this area of Malawi are very different than in Madagascar and will be different than the next place. And it requires a lot of expertise. So we're trying to navigate those partnerships to get access to that expertise to put these tools to use.
To add to what Bridget said, one of the things we need to do is put both the technical experts and the subject matter experts together, right? Either one of us working towards a problem without input from the other is not going to work. And it does not have to be a totally novel application of AI, right? While there are many new problems which we can solve with AI, which we probably couldn't solve earlier, look at the way you do your work and you'll probably identify lots of places where AI can help you. Give you an example. The UNDP does what is called a rapid integrated assessment. And what they do is they look at the national plans of various governments and try to identify if it's aligned with the 168 SDG targets. So the way they do it is they have policy experts who manually review literally hundreds of thousands of pages of national documents. And each country is different because they've written it the way they've been writing it for ages and not necessarily with the SDGs in mind. So when they came to us and said, can you help us? It's a significant pain point. We can do one RIA in a month. And what we did, we worked with them and we managed to automate it using natural language processing to the extent that when they did RIA for a new country, Papua New Guinea, they actually reduced the time to 3 to 4 days instead of 4 weeks. So it was, as I said, it wasn't a very, very new application, but it addressed a significant pain point. And there are many other examples like this.
Yeah, I also want to echo something Aubrey said about inclusion and being very important, and what Steve said about customization. The example I'd like to give that we're working on right now is some work that has come out of our Microsoft research organization, is now in our AI engineering and in the Skype team, which is working on things for allowing low resource education in remote and rural locations. So the example here is that we're building this technology that leverages some very unique communication technology underneath to create customizable experiences so that learners, no matter where they are, whether they're in rural India or rural Indiana, have an opportunity for them to have a very custom experience for proceeding through the education that's appropriate for them. And we are collaborating with various nonprofits to think about what the appropriate content is given a particular application where that would be deployed. So for instance, in a refugee camp, that's going to be different than it is in a rural situation. And we cannot get there without participating with the folks in this room. We have to collaborate with you in order to do that. But we'll bring the AI and the customization know-how to that, and even the platform to lay it on. But it's really, it's the participation, the collaboration with this community that will make it successful at enabling people who wouldn't ordinarily have an opportunity to be contributing members of their community to get the education possibilities that they can by partnering with us on developing these types of technology and platform.
Thank you through this conversation for sharing both some of the examples, but also some of the challenges and barriers. And I will have the opportunity to dive deeper into those both in the afternoon as we talk about bias, and also tomorrow as we talk about, for example, data for AI and some of the other examples. So I'll actually skip to the next question given the amount of time that we have. And that's the question that I've been hearing a lot from our members, and it's really around what should we do today? And also how can we, in the humanitarian sector, influence the development and use of AI? Since many of us have been almost on the sidelines and just getting involved, and AI is so nascent in our sector. So if you can speak to what should we do, and how do we, from the technology companies, how do we influence, and also research institutions, how do we influence what gets developed and how it gets applied?
Yeah, sure. So one thing just to underline 1,000 times over is the most critical thing that we can do right now is participate in this conversation are really in the development of these tools. And I think one thing that we've discovered when we've been, talking with people who are experimenting in this space and trying to understand how they're developing their pipelines and who's involved in that, the most productive and kind of good use of AI that we've seen is when you have these dedicated collaborations where, as our previous speaker just said, yes, quite often you will have a removed tech team. That's just a reality. No one that is working in the nonprofit space has the luxury of having as many AI experts as they might like in-house. I think that's just the reality that we're all going to continue to grapple with. But because such awesome promise exists with these kind of collaborative relationships with the tech sector where there is that expertise, I think there's great potential. The crux of that is creating collaborative relationships where you can talk openly about problem meeting solution. And so what I mean by that is we need to make sure that the tools are developed in a way that's honest to the problem that they're trying to solve, rather than in a way that's maybe best optimized for the solution inherently. And so I think that might be a kind of a roundabout way of saying that if we're not bringing contextual information and rooting all of these discussions about how these models get developed in the actual problem and context in which the tools are going to be applied, I think that the tools are going to fail us. And so for that very kind of roundabout reasoning, I really think that the critical thing for us to do is engage, even if you're not a machine learning expert, even if you don't have strong expertise in AI. I think we have lots of partners who do have that expertise, and if we can meet somewhere where we're marrying that technical expertise with the domain expertise, the subject matter expertise that so many development practitioners and humanitarian experts have, I think that's what's going to ultimately get us to the next level of being able to leverage this technology for good.
So let's stay with that, what should the humanitarian sector do today, and hear from you also, Steve. You've been incorporating AI in your work. What do you think your peers, your colleagues here should consider?
I'd say there's two primary things, and the first echoes what Alper said. It's access to partnership and expertise. So I shared that example from Malawi and Madagascar. So that's two projects. We have 494 other projects active that are not using AI or machine learning in any way. And so that access to those partnerships and expertise is really the only way we're going to be able to use this at any scale. The second recommendation is build awareness. And that's, frankly, most of the folks in our organization don't know what capabilities AI can bring to their work. And so socializing the potential of what this technology can bring in a way that's very consumable to align with the projects that they're running and the problems that they're trying to solve. So I think it's partnerships and it's awareness.
So let's come back then to our technology partners and hear from you. What do you think humanitarian sector should do today? And then begin answering the second question around how we can also influence how we develop it and how we apply it.
I think what I'd like to start with is, yes, it's true that nonprofits don't have the IT and the AI expertise that the technology companies have. But the expertise that you have is an opportunity for us to be more innovative than we possibly could be otherwise. In the last, 3 months since I've been in the team and 3 days since I've been here speaking with all of you, I've heard some of the most interesting and applicable use cases for artificial intelligence that I've heard before. I mean, as you said at the beginning, I've been in Microsoft for 18 years. So I do think that's an opportunity for us to collaborate together. Our products will be better used for other applicability outside of the sector, but you guys are the experts that actually help us do a better job by participating with us. So to echo what Aubrey said, being part of steering committees like the Common Data Model, for instance, is an excellent example of where this community participated to make a product of ours better. That opportunity also exists with things like our cognitive services and with our AI platforms as well. So be a window into us. Be the experts for us so that we actually have the use cases that can help drive the innovation back at the ranch.
So let's then come back to this point around partnering and talk about some of the available resources and expertise from the tech sector. And let's start with Bridget.
Sure. So there's a suite of resources. Obviously, some I've mentioned in terms of the specific, but so Google has really made an effort to actually try to put into the open source universe most of our fundamental machine learning tools. So we have, on the more technical side, our open source libraries and TensorFlow. We also have a lot of APIs and other tools that have been released. That's obviously on the more technical side. We've also been working hard to develop open education materials. So for technologists, there's a machine learning crash course, which is the course that we've actually used to educate more than 20,000 Google technologists on AI and incorporating into their products. And that's completely free and available. And we've just actually, with the new AI for Social Good announcement, created a guide that actually summarizes a bunch of the resources available, everything from the kind of basics to things like fairness and responsibility that's available now in kind of an organized format. And one of the things I'm really excited about is that part of that is open sourcing a piece of a training that we do internally for non-technologists on how to apply AI and ML in their work called Introduction to Problem Framing. And it's essentially a tool to walk through what is the problem that you're trying to solve, and is ML a good tool for it? So really encourage folks who are trying to think about this work and whether it's applicable in your universe to check that out in particular.
Thank you, Bridget. Melinda, what are some of the resources and expertise that IBM can bring to the table?
For the Science for Good program, as I said, we've been looking at around 6 to 10 initiatives every year. And going forward, that's going to be the same. So what we do, as I said, is we talk to NGOs. So NGOs can initiate the contact with us, or we'll go out and try to identify problems where we have the expertise and we can devote that. And they bring forward the subject matter experts, and we find the academic fellows, and so we can get together and do it. So one thing I would like to say about what Audrey and Bridget said is, for example, for IBM research, we have lots and lots of researchers, right, who do technical work by themselves. And we would like to see it impact, right, the real world. And the way we can do it is if the nonprofit works with us, sector works with us and says, here are the problems where we think you can help. And we say, okay, we can help, and we can work together.
So an open invitation to all of you who have problems that need to be solved to come and talk to our partners here. Kristen, is there anything else you'd like to add for Microsoft in terms of resources and expertise?
Yeah, we also have a series of trainings available that you can get online at our Microsoft.com/AI, and also if you're interested in applying for some of the grants and things like that, there's Microsoft.com and then AI for Good. In addition to that, a lot of the tools that we've developed, because we realize that not everybody is going to have those AI expertise, that there are a lot of tools where you can try out some of the cognitive services through user interfaces, so that you don't have to write a line of code, but you could literally stand up your own bot. You just paste in a few URLs and you actually can create something called a Q&A maker bot. And we have the same thing available for our machine translation, for computer vision, where you don't have to write a line of code. And I would encourage you to try them and let us know what works for you, what's not working for you, so that we don't end up creating barriers for adoption.
Yeah, thank you. And what we'll also do over the course of the next 2 days, we'll capture all of the resources and insights and compile them for you and make them available as a recap of the discussions. But I want to come back to, so it's fantastic that there are all these resources and expertise, and would love to hear from Steve and Abra around how do we effectively activate them? How do you actually work in this cross-sector collective impact model when incorporating AI? It's one of the burning questions for many of you. So if we could start with Steve, if you could share from your experience, both what are some of the challenges and what are some of the opportunities?
Yeah, so our approach so far has been working with university partners, which is a reasonable way to get started, but it won't scale over time. And where I'd like to see us going over time is influencing our technology partners to help create services on top of the AI capabilities that are more easily consumable and more easily applied, so that when we're talking with our folks in the field trying to use these tools, we're actually not talking about AI, we're talking about the capabilities and the problems they can solve. Kind of like, it's almost like a democratization of AI or machine learning, making it more accessible and more achievable by more people.
So the way that I would answer that question is to focus on the challenge. Like, this is really hard. It's not just about warm, fuzzy relationship. We call, our partners over at the Tech Hub in Silicon Valley and everything, we have a great relationship and it goes well. The thing that's hard is that developing good machine learning models and AI models requires being very hands-on in terms of bringing the problem to bear in the development of those tools. And those are very technical conversations. And so that's something that may not be a comfort zone for a lot of people who are super solid experts in humanitarian response or in agricultural loans. I mean, it really depends on how familiar you are with coding, whether you feel ready to engage in those kinds of conversations. But the thing that, to me, creates the most impactful usage of this technology is if you can really inject the problem that you're trying to solve in every stage of model development. And that means, at the stage of identifying what data sources are relevant for the problem that you're trying to solve. What do you have access to? What's out there? Identifying what kinds of evaluation metrics need to be applied, how you're going to test for the fairness of your model across specific groups that you need to ensure that you're working with and serving. And so all of those conversations really require a strong, solid relationship and a strong and open conversation. And so I think the things that we've seen that indicate really solid success models are where those difficult kind of foundations are put in place. And when I say difficult foundations, I just mean they take a lot of time and work.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe just quickly in summary, as we are out of time, one of the key things that I'm hearing from this discussion is that not only that there's a whole set of problems that could be solved with AI, and you've shared some of the examples, there's also, we have the opportunity and responsibility as a sector to get engaged, and there are a number of ways that we can get involved, everything from learning to really experimenting and influencing how AI gets developed and applied in our sector. So a huge thank you to the panelists who've traveled from all over the world to be here with us today. And do find them during the break, and also join us for the 1 p.m. session. And those of you who are coming for the workshop, we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Okay, it's break time. So we are going to take half an hour break. Come back in here 10:45.